Claire Morgan sat in the corner booth of the cozy cafe, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and making the hanging plants glow green and gold. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, the kind that usually lifted her spirits, but today all she felt was the familiar weight of dread, another blind date. The fifth one this year that her well-meaning sister had arranged. Claire had agreed only to stop the constant nagging, the concerned looks, the thinly veiled pity in her family's eyes whenever holidays rolled around and she showed up alone. At 32, Claire had built a good life for herself. She taught literature at the community college, had published 2 well-received poetry collections with a small press, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and had a circle of genuine friends. By any reasonable measure, she was successful and content, but in her family's eyes, and in the eyes of society that constantly bombarded her with messages about her worth, she was failing at the one thing that apparently mattered most: finding a man. The problem, as her mother had delicately mentioned more times than Claire could count, was her size. Claire was a plus-size woman, curvy and soft, in a world that prized sharp angles and visible bones. She'd tried every diet, spent years hating herself, before finally making peace with her body. She was healthy, active, and comfortable in her own skin now. But that didn't stop the comments, the unsolicited advice, the way men's eyes would slide past her at social gatherings as if she were invisible. Claire? She looked up to see a man standing beside the table, and her breath caught. He was absolutely striking, with dark hair swept back from his face, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His eyes were a startling blue-green, and his smile was uncertain but genuine. This couldn't be her blind date. Men who looked like this didn't get set up on blind dates, and they certainly didn't get matched with women like her. "I'm Ryan," he said, extending his hand. "Ryan Fitzgerald. Your sister Emily set this up?" "That's me," Claire said, shaking his hand and trying to mask her confusion. "Please, sit down." As Ryan settled into the seat across from her, Claire studied him more carefully. The expensive watch, the confident bearing, the way the barista had immediately brightened when he'd walked in, all signs of someone used to attention and respect. Her sister had mentioned he was successful, but she'd downplayed it, probably knowing Claire would refuse if she'd known the full extent of the mismatch. "I have to say," Ryan began, that uncertain smile still playing at his lips, "I was nervous about this. I haven't been on a blind date since college. Why did you agree to this one?" Claire asked, curiosity overriding her usual politeness. Ryan laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his handsome face into something warmer and more approachable. "Your sister is very persuasive. She works at my company, actually, Fitzgerald Industries. And she cornered me in the break room with pictures of you and stories about your poetry and wouldn't let me leave until I agreed." Claire felt her cheeks burn. "I'm sorry. Emily means well, but she can be incredibly pushy. You really don't have to stay. I'm sure you have better things to do with your afternoon than fulfill an obligation to a persistent employee." "An obligation?" Ryan's brow furrowed. "Is that what you think this is?" "Isn't it?" Claire met his eyes directly, years of disappointment giving her a bluntness she wouldn't normally possess. "Look at you and then look at me. We both know how this works. You're here because my sister guilted you into it or because you're too polite to say no. So let's just skip the awkward hour of small talk and part as friendly strangers." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made Claire want to look away. "Do you always assume the worst about people's motivations?" "I assume what experience has taught me," Claire replied. "I'm not naive, Ryan. I know what I look like. I know I don't fit the standard of what men like you typically date." "Men like me," Ryan repeated slowly. "You mean successful men? Wealthy men? Or just men in general?" "All of the above," Claire said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Let me save us both some time and discomfort. I've heard all the lines before. You have such a pretty face. You're beautiful for your size. You'd be perfect if you just lost some weight. So let's skip to the part where you politely excuse yourself, and we can both get on with our lives." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You're absolutely right about one thing. This date isn't starting well, but not for the reasons you think. Then enlighten me, Claire said. Because you're so busy protecting yourself from perceived rejection that you're not even giving me a chance, Ryan said, his voice gentle but firm. You've written our entire story before we've exchanged more than a few sentences. You've decided I'm shallow, that I only value appearance, that I couldn't possibly be genuinely interested in getting to know you. Claire opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. He wasn't wrong. I agreed to this date because Emily showed me your poetry, Ryan continued. She has a copy of your collection on her desk. I picked it up one day while waiting to discuss a project, and I started reading. Your words, Claire, they're extraordinary. They're raw and honest, and they see beauty in unexpected places. I wanted to meet the person who could write with that much depth and courage. That's a nice thing to say, Claire said quietly, her defenses wavering. It's the truth, Ryan insisted. Yes, I'm successful. Yes, I've dated conventionally attractive women. And you want to know something? Most of those relationships were empty. Beautiful packages with nothing substantial inside. I'm 35 years old and I'm tired of surface-level connections. I want substance. I want someone who understands that real beauty runs deeper than appearance. That's a lovely speech, Claire said, and despite herself, she felt tears prickling her eyes. But here's the thing, Ryan. I've spent my entire adult life being told in 1,000 subtle and not-so-subtle ways that I'm not enough. That my intelligence, my kindness, my accomplishments, they all mean nothing if I don't fit into the right size clothing. So, forgive me if I'm skeptical when a man who looks like he stepped out of a magazine tells me he's interested in my depth of character. Ryan was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Then he said something that caught her completely off guard. You're right. No one marries a fat girl. At least that's what society keeps telling women like you. And that's exactly why we should prove them all wrong. Claire stared at him. What? Every person who's ever made you feel less than? Every date who's rejected you based on appearance? Every family member who's looked at you with pity? Every stranger who's judged you without knowing your story? Let's prove them all wrong. Ryan leaned forward, his expression intense. Not because you need to prove anything to them, but because you deserve to be chosen for exactly who you are. And I'd like the chance to be the person who does that choosing. You don't even know me, Claire whispered. Then let me get to know you, Ryan said. Give me a real chance. Not this defensive, protective version of yourself, but the real Claire. The one who writes poetry about finding light in darkness. The one your sister describes as the most loyal, funny, brilliant person she knows. Give me the opportunity to discover for myself whether we have something worth exploring. Claire felt something inside her crack open, some wall she'd built over years of hurt and rejection. Why would you want to take on someone else's baggage? Someone who's spent so long being told she's not enough that she's forgotten how to believe anything different. Because I have my own baggage, Ryan said with a sad smile. My ex-wife left me for her personal trainer. She said I worked too much, that I cared more about my company than about her. She was probably right. I've spent the last 2 years building walls, dating casually, keeping everything surface level because it's safer than risking real connection. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, not touching but offering. Maybe we're both broken in our own ways. Maybe that's exactly why we should give this a chance. Because two people who've been hurt understand how precious it is when someone actually sees you and chooses you anyway. Claire looked at his hand, then up at his face. She saw sincerity there, but also uncertainty, vulnerability. This wasn't some perfect prince sweeping in to save her. This was a man who'd been hurt too, who was taking his own risk in being honest. Slowly, Claire placed her hand in his. Okay, she said. Let's start over. Hi, I'm Claire Morgan. I teach literature, write poetry, and I'm terrified of being hurt again, but trying to be brave anyway. Ryan's smile lit up his entire face. Hi, Claire. I'm Ryan Fitzgerald. I run a tech company, work too many hours, and I'm equally terrified but willing to try if you are. That afternoon stretched into evening as they talked. Really talked, without walls or pretense. Ryan told her about growing up with parents who valued success above everything, about the pressure to prove himself, about the loneliness of building an empire with no one to share it with. Claire told him about her struggles with self-worth, about finding her voice through writing, about the fear that she'd never be chosen for who she truly was. "My mother once told me," Claire said as the cafe prepared to close around them, "that I needed to lose weight if I ever wanted to find love." She said it out of concern, out of wanting me to be happy. But what she couldn't understand was that her words made me feel like I wasn't worthy of love as I am right now. "You are worthy," Ryan said firmly. "Not in spite of anything, not if you change anything, but exactly as you are in this moment." Their first date turned into a second, then a third. Ryan introduced Claire to his world gradually, never pushing her to change, always making space for her to be herself. He came to her poetry readings, sitting in the front row and beaming with pride. She visited his office, meeting the employees who clearly respected and admired him, including her sister who looked at them with barely concealed delight. But it wasn't easy. There were stares when they walked together, whispered comments that Claire pretended not to hear. There were people who assumed she was his assistant or his sister, never his girlfriend. There were family members on both sides who made their doubts clear. "She's lovely. Dear," Ryan's mother said at their first dinner together. "But is she really the type of woman you want to be seen with at corporate functions?" Ryan's response was immediate and firm. "She's exactly the type of woman I want to be seen with everywhere, Mother. And if that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why another person's appearance bothers you so much." And when Claire's aunt cornered her at a family gathering and whispered, "Don't get too attached, sweetheart. Men like him don't marry women like you," Claire finally found the courage to respond. "Maybe not," she said clearly. "But Ryan isn't men like him. He's himself. And I'm not women like me, I'm myself. And together, we're writing our own story, not the one society thinks we should have." A year later, Ryan proposed, not with a grand gesture, but with words. He took Claire to the same cafe where they'd had their first date, sat in the same booth, and handed her a leather-bound book. "Open it," he said softly. Inside was a collection of his own writing, entries he'd made over the course of their relationship, thoughts about her, about them, about learning what love really meant. The last page held a single question. "Will you continue this story with me forever?" "Yes," Claire said through happy tears. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was a celebration of authenticity over appearance, of love that chose to see beyond surfaces. Claire wore a dress that fit her perfectly, that made her feel beautiful without trying to hide or minimize who she was. Ryan's vows included a promise to always choose her, exactly as she was, and to help her remember her worth on days when she forgot. But perhaps the most memorable moment came during the reception. When Claire's aunt approached them, tears in her eyes. "I was wrong," she said simply. "So wrong. The way he looks at you, Claire. The way you've blossomed since you've been together. I've never seen anything more beautiful. I'm sorry for ever doubting that you deserved this." "The thing is," Claire said gently, "I always deserved it. I just had to learn to believe it myself." Years later, Claire published a third poetry collection titled "Proving Them Wrong." The dedication read, "To Ryan, who saw me when I couldn't see myself, and to everyone still learning that they are enough exactly as they are. Because sometimes the greatest revolution is refusing to believe the lies society tells us about our worth. Sometimes proving people wrong isn't about changing who we are, but about finding someone who celebrates us exactly as we are. And sometimes the love we thought we didn't deserve finds us anyway, teaching us that we were always worthy, always enough, always deserving of being chosen. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that your worth isn't determined by your appearance and that real love sees beyond society's narrow standards, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about finding authentic connection, learning self-worth, and the courage to believe you deserve to be chosen. Comment below about a time when someone saw your true value when you couldn't see it yourself, or about learning to love yourself exactly as you are. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.